Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today Mr. J F Holmes. Oh no, my thing is lagging. It always lags. The soundboard.
Of
I
course
should
it does.
have. I should have tested ahead of time. All right. Well, it's just gonna start doing it in the middle of our conversation here in a minute. So, you know
Of
what? I'm
course.
just gonna edit it in. Here we go. It's clapping right now. All right, so, Mr. J F Holmes,
Yes, sir.
um, tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do for fun? I know you mentioned that you have a day job. Tell me everything about yourself you would like everybody to know.
Sure. Retired military, served 22 years, regular Army, Army National Guard. But that's not my whole life. I'm not one of those veterans who's like, hey, I was in the military, rah, rah. I've got much more of my life outside of that. Started writing about about 10 years ago. When my wife told me to stop complaining about how unrealistic The Walking Dead is. If you can, it's a zombie show, but I was irritated at the lack of a military presence there, and I kept commenting on you know civilians picking up handguns and making headshots from 100 yards away and things like that. So she said, if you can do better, then go ahead. And I wrote my first book. I had a cartoon strip called PowerPoint Ranger, and I had a pretty good following. I started putting chapters up on there, and it did pretty well. So I got my revenge by putting her on the cover. Okay. Um, and about 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, uh, I started a publishing company, and it took a lot to learn how to do this, self publishing, writing, and everything like that. And I kind of wanted to help people out so that they didn't have to go through all the BS that I went through. Right. The industry when I started was just kind of starting to take off, but it's got more and more complicated each year. So, I always like mentoring. I'm retired E7 platoon sergeant. I like leading troops. I like developing careers, that kind of stuff. So I figured I might as well, help some other guys out. And then I was down at LibertyCon last year, and I have a friend of mine, William J. Roberts, hillbilly. I don't know if you ever talked to him. Should interview him. It's a great interview. And he told me that I need to figure out what the hell I'm doing, right? Because he's from down south. He's like, goddamn Yankee, you need to figure out what you're doing with your company. So I said, sure. And last year we've kicked it in gear and picked up some good authors, and now we're doing okay. I mean, so we're out there and it's growing, which every day I'm like, should I keep doing this or not? Should I keep doing it or not? Because it takes a lot of work. It's a small business, cuts into my
Mhm.
writing time, and but I do enjoy the development part of it, and I've got some really good guys on the crew. So there you go.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I love that story. Why don't we actually continue on talking about the publishing company then? So,
Sure.
you mentioned that things have been getting harder to publish the last few years. So, walk me through what that process used to be like and why it's more difficult now.
Well, when self-publishing first started out, um, there wasn't a lot of people doing it, right? And so it was fairly simple. And also, when I got started, social media wasn't pay to play so much, right? So if you had a large following, or it was easy to build a large following, and for people to get to notice you, right? Now the market is flooded with, I mean, there are millions of authors out there, literally. Maybe not millions of authors, but millions of books. And to get noticed is very hard, right? I don't think I would have gotten picked up same as I did back then. Um, the publishing aspect of it is still fairly easy. You set up your account, you upload your book, design your cover, however you get it, buy it, design it. It's the getting out there, getting noticed, um, somehow standing above the rest and standing out from the crowd. That's the harder thing now, right?
Hmm.
Um, and also, I found a lot of people like myself are convinced that I'm, I was the next greatest writer since sliced bread, right? And a lot of people learn the hard way that they're not, like I did. You know, if I had $1 for every 2-star review that says needs an editor, right? You know, I'd probably be a very wealthy man. But you know, so you got to provide quality, much more quality nowadays, and now we're facing an even bigger challenge because I mean the market's getting flooded with AI books, right? So how do you get past that, right? How do you make yourself the standout person? You know, so it's gotten easier and harder in both ways. Market's flooded.
Okay.
Everybody writes now. How do you stand out? But on the other hand, there's some good tools out there too. So
Yeah. Well, so that actually leads me to my next question, which would be like, if there are so many authors, and I'm sure you receive hundreds or thousands of submissions a month, I've heard of in some cases for publishers.
uh,
What's
uh,
your vetting process?
well, tell people to send me their first 3 chapters of their book uh, as a no, first yeah, first 3 chapters or first 3 pages basically, right? Um, it depends on how much I've talked to somebody beforehand. If I know them, I've spoken to them at a convention or something like that, I'll ask for a little more, right? But just for a blind submission, I'll say, you know, send the first couple chapters or even the first couple pages, and I can kind of know right away what their quality is. You know, whether they can actually write. Some people are great storytellers, not such good grammarians, I guess you would say, like me. Okay, um, my my wife won't read my books anymore because my spelling drives her crazy sometimes. You know, so I'm like, hey, I've gotten a lot better. She's like, nah. So yeah, I just look at the first couple of pages, and I can pretty much tell right away whether you have what it takes in order to be somebody. And then I go look at their social media presence and what they can bring to the table. Because unfortunately, as small indie companies, we can't afford to be like the big trade publishers and be like, oh, we're going to send you on a 20 city book tour, stuff like that. To be successful in that, you really have to be kind of a self promoter, right? I'll give you the
Yeah.
tools to do so and help you out as much as I can, but you got to be a personality, right? You got to be out there. It's like any other job to be successful. You got to be throwing yourself out there. And some people are just, you know, that's just not their way, and it's going to hurt their book sales, right?
Hmm.
So, 2 things I can kind of tell right away just from a small submission, right? And then I'll look and see basically, are they going to be a good worker? And that, it sounds kind of cheesy because it's more a partnership than it is an employer employee relationship. But if I'm going to work hard for them, then they need to work hard for themselves too, right? So, and
Yeah,
that's what it
that's
takes.
one thing that I've discovered when talking to authors, whether they be self-published or traditionally published, is like it is like a business, and
Oh, it is.
you got to like compile someone to do the cover, you got to hire an editor, you got to do marketing, all the stuff that you just mentioned. And honestly, this is kind of one of the reasons that like I started this podcast is that
Sure.
getting out there is hard for authors. And so many
Mhm.
authors have so many great things to say, but they have no platform to say it other than their books, which no one's buying if they don't know they exist. So it's like
Right.
I want to help authors get their words out there because so many people are so wise and have so many great stories to tell.
Yeah. I mean, when I meet somebody, I had some people who helped me, who mentored me, right, and introduced me to certain places and other people who you got to make those connections. You got to be able to make those connections with people, and it's like any other business, you know. If you're not willing to get out there and talk to the people who are the big names in the field, I mean, you know, they might be the hook that helps you up, right?
Hmm.
You know, if Larry Correa or somebody like that says, "Hey, you might want to check out John's book," not that Larry's ever done that for me. We know each other. Well, I know him. I don't know if he remembers me, but I've written for Bain. You know, I've gotten into, you know, I've done a couple anthologies with a couple different people, and that helps me get my name out. So there was another thought that I had, just can't remember. Oh yeah,
Hmm.
so social media. The One of the big differences now between traditionally is you're very accessible. to people, right? So I have a fan group where I put up portions of my work, and people can read that, give me feedback, and also a lot of technical details. I've got a pretty big military following. I write primarily military themed stuff. If I don't remember or don't know because it's not my area of expertise, I can go onto my fan group and say, hey, what color are the lights inside a UH-60 Black or UH-60 Blackhawk? And they'll answer me in 2 seconds. I've written them a lot, but I just don't remember, right? Or you put up a chapter and they're like, that sucks. Where's your plot going, right? So you have much more interconnectivity. Stephen King never sat down with his fans and, said, hey, let's have a Facebook conversation. So, there's a big difference between now and even 10 or 15 years ago, the accessibility. So,
Yeah. Awesome.
sorry, I just popped in.
So real quick, you mentioned military science fiction. I'm assuming is mostly what you carry. Is that correct?
Sort of. Yes, no, maybe. We do everything from military science fiction, military fantasy. There's generally a military theme. Thrillers, modern day action thrillers. We're trying to expand out into some fantasy stuff because I'll take a good book with somebody if it's a good story, right? We're working on one of those with a new author. And then to actually make money, we're going to launch a romance line. I'm just kidding. Right? If that's what you do, if you want to make money, you write romance.
I've heard smut's where it's at.
Yeah. So, no, yeah, most of our stuff's military. Most of the people that write for me are veterans. Not everybody. And when I say write for me, I mean, like I said, it's a partnership. But most of us are veterans. The ones that aren't, they've got a tough skin, right? And they can fit in with the rest of us. So, but yeah, military sci-fi, science fiction, fantasy. Our three biggest lines are post-apocalyptic, zombie stuff, and we have a mishmash of military and fantasy where basically the 69th Infantry in New York City takes on a bunch of elves who invade our world, right? It's a big series. And so, yeah, but we're always trying to expand. You got to find new markets. You can't sit on your ass. And I'm sorry, is this like a G-rated YouTube?
No, you can
Okay.
swear. I don't give a shit.
No, I don't usually swear because if Sergeant Holmes starts swearing, then you know you're in big trouble. Okay, it's a tool. You keep it, you hang on to it. You don't use it very often, and then when you drop an F-bomb, all the junior enlisted go, "Oh crap, we're in trouble." So there you go.
The same thing goes for writing, or even like musical lyrics. I'd say like if people are just swearing every other sentence, it you get numb to it. It doesn't matter anymore. But if you really like enunciate it, like once in a while, they're like, okay, let me actually pay attention to this.
Right. And also, I think a lot of military writers or veterans make a mistake of the people that they're talking to aren't their guys in their squad. You want to reach a civilian market. You want to reach people who can pick up a book and not like read, every other word to be a curse word. We may talk like that sometimes in the military. And my wife, who's a nurse, tells me that they talk like that in the hospital settings too. But you got to think of your bigger audience, right? I don't. People send me gun porn all the time. Okay, I don't publish it because you're going to lose reader interest if you spend 3 pages describing how you hand loaded a gun and or bullets and with this number of grains and it's this level of velocity and this weight. Yeah, and you know what? That maybe there's a market for that. It's not a big market, and you got to appeal to the average reader. Right. The biggest thing that I always emphasize when I talk to writers is characters. Okay. Like I have a pretty popular post-apocalyptic zombie series, and it's always the tagline is it's about the team. It's not about the zombies. They're a prop. It's the situations that the teams and the characters find themselves in. It's not the big story. It's the little story. So, and you can't tell that story with guns. I mean, they're a prop also. It's about humans and people, or aliens
Yeah.
and people. So
Yeah, absolutely. Like at the core of every story, there needs to be a good character. Like there are some people that pulled off like amazing stories that are about the world. Like some people would
Yeah.
argue that like Tolkien, he wrote about the characters, but also the stories about Middle Earth. And so
Right.
some people can do it, but like most people don't care that there was a city 300 years ago that burned because of a particular war because a king slept with the daughter. Like no one cares. They just want to know about like the problem that someone is running into right now and how it relates to them in their life.
Right. Because they want to see themselves, basically. Maybe
Yeah.
not exactly, but um, everybody wants to be Aragorn. Sorry, or maybe you're a little bit of Boromir, right? It's you kind of see yourselves in those things. My wife
Yeah.
calls me Sam Gamgee. I'm the guy that's just the loyal dude that works with everybody. So yeah, it's about the characters. Everybody, the best thing about my books, and people tell me, is they love my characters. So,
Mhm.
but
Awesome.
universe building is also very important too. You got to be consistent, and you got to take people to a place that's a different place because reading is escapism. So,
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that then. So, what to you makes one a successful universe, and two, how can someone properly incorporate world building into their book without drawing the reader out of the story?
because you use the story to tell the universe, right? The the actions of the people and the conversations and things are driven by that universe, right? So that creates the universe, right? I hate information dumps where it's like 3 pages of, like you said, 300 years ago, this city burned, blah, blah. No, you have a conversation with people. Like your guys are walking through the ruins of a city, and one's like, yeah, this place must have been pretty freaking awesome at one time. Oh, did you ever get to go to Manhattan before the apocalypse? No, I never got down there. Oh man, you should have seen what it was like. You're telling the story through the actions of you're building the universe through the actions of the people who are in it, right?
Mhm.
Like if you're playing a first person shooter, you discover the universe by going through the universe, right? Nobody's telling you anything. You're just going through it and you're seeing it, right? Same thing with, a fantasy world. Sometimes you got to give details, yes, but really it's the events that tell the universe. Does that sound like it makes sense?
Yeah,
It's the people in
absolutely.
the universe telling the story, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I like getting different perspectives on that, especially from like a publisher, because really like you're in some aspects like the gatekeeper to getting your book out to the public. And so
Yeah.
like I want to understand what makes you want to pick up a title, for example. And let's actually ask you that question. So you had mentioned earlier, you can read in the first three chapters if someone can write or not. But what's like the X factor that makes you really say, okay, this is it? Is it like something in the first three pages that the way they lay out the scene? Is it their style of writing? Is it a combination of all of that? Like walk me through that.
Well, one of the reasons I say the first couple of chapters is because when you go on Amazon or you go to a bookstore, you pick up a book and you read the first couple of pages, right? And if you don't catch somebody's attention right away, um, you're not going to make a sale, right? So, how does somebody get my attention? They walk up to me at a convention and be like, "Hey, I love your books, and you're the best writer I ever met, and I want to write with you." No, it's really hard. Sometimes I have my own biases, right? I love certain kinds of fiction myself. Um, you gotta you gotta catch a character right away. Your character has to be interesting. The scene has to be interesting, and that's the hardest thing to write is the opening chapter, right? How do you catch people's attention? Um, and it has to be a little bit offbeat. I mean, there's a lot of generic stuff out there that's just the same stuff over and over. And does it sell? Sure, but um, I don't know what catches my attention. That's kind of hard. If I start reading and I keep reading, that's what tells me, right? And if I start reading and I get a page into it, I'm like, it's so subjective. It's not even funny, and I may like something, and my editor, Mike Morton, might be like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you want to work with this guy," right? Or he'll say, "Yeah, I was looking in the slush pile, and I really like this one. I'm like, yeah, it just doesn't work for me. But he'll say, yeah, but this is what we can do with it. Mike loves to look at the big picture and kind of rebuild a couple things. So that works. And also the kind of person that you are, right? Um, so, like, we're working on a novel with a guy named Jonathan LaForce, and it's about a British all female unit in Afghanistan who gets assigned a U.S. Marine artillery platoon as their like force protection element. So when you take a bunch of Marines guys and you put them in, I was going to say embedded, but it sounds too much like in bed, with a bunch of female British Army engineers, hijinks ensue, right? I'm like, okay, that's a cool concept, right? So the first thing is you give me a outline of your book, what it's about, right? And then you somehow deliver with the characters. That's the biggest thing, all right? And again, like I said, it's kind of subjective. So
Mm-hmm.
I
Okay.
think every publishing company has their own style.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could tell when I perused your website that you had like a certain style. That's why I kind of guessed it was military sci-fi, and then I saw some fantasy-esque stuff. What was the title that you mentioned with the was it the Fay Wars?
Fay Wars, yeah, okay.
Okay,
So
awesome.
my buddy Lucas, we were friends on Facebook, and we were chatting, and he's had written a series called Valkyrie. Lucas is a medical officer in the army, right, and a medical professional outside the Army Reserves, and he came up with the idea for a medevac unit. You guys know that with the Red Crosses, and they fly in, pick up the casualties and stuff. Set in the 25th century, right? And he and I, both being big history nerds, he came up with this big interstellar war, but we modeled it on the war in the Pacific and World War II, where they're island hopping, the planets being the islands. And the medevac unit is called Valkyries, right? Great series, space opera. Loved it right away. We published it, did really well. And he goes, we're sitting having a conversation at his house one day, and he goes, I really hate Tolkien's elves. They're a bunch of assholes. I'm like, really? Because I mean, I'm a big Tolkien guy, right? I love the elves; they're great. If you look at it one way, but he's like, no, I just can't stand them. They're a bunch of arrogant pricks. And he goes, I have this idea of a National Guard unit fighting these guys, but they get a spell put on them, and they're stuck in a time loop, and they have to continuously fight the same battle over and over. I'm like, that's kind of cool. So we put our heads together. Um, we took out our Dungeons and Dragons books and said, okay, these are what the spells look like, right? Why make it complicated? Okay. And then I sat down and wrote the first book, which was I write military stuff. So it starts out with a Delta Force team in Manhattan who is sending a message to the Chinese by removing certain people from the face of the earth, right? Completely undercover. I'm from New York, my hometown. So I write what I know, right? That's the other thing I never mentioned. Write what you know. It helps. Not that I was Delta or anything, but I know what it looks like when you look out over Central Park and they finish waxing these guys and they're eating a pizza while they go through the bodies looking for intelligence. And one of the guys looks out the window and there's a portal in the middle of Central Park and there's dragons and orcs and everything coming through, right? So the next 3 days are complete mayhem, which winds up with an epic battle between the 69th Infantry and the elves on the Brooklyn Bridge. I just went to town. I had fun, right? Sometimes I'm like, people write me and they're like, military kicked the elves' ass. I'm like, well, you don't have any imagination, right? It's technology versus magic, right? And it was a lot of fun to write. And Lucas wrote the second book, which is centered on a Pennsylvania National Guard unit retreating into the mountains and getting their ass kicked, right? He's from Pennsylvania. Um, James Copley, I ran into at LibertyCon, which is down in Chattanooga last year, year before. I said, hey, you want to write for me? Because I knew he wrote some stuff. He's like, yeah, I really loved your Fay Wars books. I'm like, all right, cool. So he wrote a book set in California, same kind of, the invasion. Then we did an anthology of just all separate stories. So that's how the world builds. It takes off from there, right? I'm writing next book with my characters, which is called Insurgent, right? So basically, the guys are underground now. Lucas is writing his book, which is a little more fantasy oriented, where magic starts getting mixed up. So that's how that whole project developed. Okay. Um, I have a pretty successful series called the Regular Scout Team 1, which is about my original series, about just a bunch of guys out in the wilderness after the apocalypse, and the army is coming back, and they need somebody to go out in front and see, are the bridges still intact? Where are all the zombies? Where are the survivors? Is there infrastructure? What are we going to run into? They're scouts, right? Um, Shane, I was talking with him online, and I said, you know what? You're an infantry officer, mechanized. Why don't you write this whole apocalypse from the point of view of somebody in a regular mechanized army unit? So it's set in the same universe. It's a completely separate storyline, right? And then I have a Marine guy who's going to start writing it from the Marine point of view, right? So this is how these things build on each other. On the other hand, I have books with entire universes that I've created, that I've loved, I've written. They haven't sold so well. I don't follow up on them. It's just the way it goes. I had a series called Invasion. You're familiar with Ender's Game, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm sitting there in a shower one day where all the best ideas come to people. I'm like, what if Ender lost? Right. So the story opens up with this boy genius who's now in his 30s and living in an occupied Earth. And then how do you fight back when the enemy holds the high ground? They hold space. What do you do? Well, you gather intelligence, you try and figure out what's going on, and you basically make a roll of the dice and you attack all at once and you try and seize their space stations. From there, it turned into a 3-book series, which I loved, sold pretty well. I said it was going to be 3 books, and that's it. And, I wrote a series called Offworld, where we set up colonies on another planet. There's a nuclear war back home. Now you have a city full of humans who are cut off, and they're fighting these bipedal rhinoceroses. Sold pretty well. I loved it. Wrote 2 books in it. Left everybody hanging. Never went back to it because you get a little burnt out sometimes on the things that you write, So, and then I'm always full of new ideas. And running a company, we've got 7 or 8 books in development. It takes a lot out of your mind, So I haven't really been able to write as much as I'd like to anymore. It's a different phase of my life.
How many titles does your company have?
I think we have 35 out right now.
Wow.
Some more successful than others, right? But yeah, there's like 4 mainline series, and then there's a couple of individual ones. Got our Space Mercenaries book. I love Hammer Slangers. I don't know if you ever read that back in the day.
No.
Okay. It's pretty famous military science fiction. It's about an armored unit in the 27th century. So I wrote a book about 27th century mercenaries. And again, Lucas and I are big nerds when it comes to history. So we plotted out Earth, or the Terran Union, was overrun by aliens. And then that lasted for like 500 years. And then that empire fell apart. So just like after Rome fell, you have all these countries that were used to be part of the Roman Empire, but now they're all fighting amongst themselves, tribes or whatever, for their territories. And just like in post-colonial Africa, you have mercenary units that mess with governments and, all that kind of stuff. So I wrote the Irish Brigade, and we've done 4 books in that series. So yeah, we kind of go bounce all over the place. So.
Wow. And how many titles do you personally have, whether they're published or not?
Me?
Yeah.
With just my name on it.
Yeah, just your name, whether they're published or not. How many books have you written and just put on pen to paper?
20, maybe. They're not super long because I have a problem. I can't tell super long stories. It's just me, because I just sit down and tell the story. And if it's 40,000 words, it's 40,000 words. If it's 80,000, it's 80,000.
What would you say the average
some books have
is?
Because of the business model, you got to shoot for at least 70,000, 60 to 70,000 words. Otherwise, people won't buy it, right? Also, Audible, you can't sell short books. People don't want to listen to 2 or 3 hour books. So you tend to write longer ones. On the other hand, the business model is you don't go over 100,000 because you want to split the story up into series. If I sell one book that's 200,000 words for $3.99, or I split it into three books that are 60,000 words each, I'll sell each of those books for $3.99. See what I'm saying? So the
Yeah.
business model is now to churn out books in series. I'm rebranding or re-releasing. When I first started writing IST1, it was called Zombie Killers, and I skipped around all over the place. I wrote 11 books total, and they weren't in order because I was always like, oh, wait, this would look good. Like, what happened before this, right? Or you got a 2-year gap here. So I'm re-releasing that as 5 books with everything put in order and everything. So I would say with my name on it, I've got 12, 13 titles maybe. But like I said, it's been hard to write lately. Maybe I'm getting
Yeah.
old. I don't know. You hit your
Yeah.
50s and you just kind of slow down. So,
Well, hopefully I got a few more years in me then.
yeah. No, I hope I do too. Um, so what else? What do you got, man?
Um, did you mark if you wanted to read an excerpt, or are you good tonight?
You don't want me to. I'm good.
All
You
right.
guys, I'm not a narrator. Okay. We have a great narrator. His name's Talon Beeson, and he is a Screen Guild actor and voice artist. And he does our Audible stuff, and most of our stuff is out on Audible. So go check that out. He tells a great story, and we've actually become pretty good friends. And I told him, I said, you'll make enough money to take your wife out to dinner. That's another thing. When I talk to the authors and people who are going to work with me, they're like, well, how much money am I going to make? And I said, you're going to be able to afford to take your significant other out to dinner. Anything more than that, I'm not promising anything, man.
Yeah.
Standard contract for us is 50-50 split. I take care of as much advertising as I can and provide the cover, editorial service. Um, so I don't ever ask anybody to pay money. If somebody does that, they're trying to scam you.
Yeah.
Um, but on the other hand, I don't know if a book's going to be a success or not. If you want to write in one of our universes, you'll have that association. You'll probably do okay. If you try it on your own, I have no idea. I've had books fall flat on their face that I thought were good, and I had to say to the author, "Hey, we tried." So
Hmm.
I'm babbling. No, I don't want to read my stuff. Sorry.
Okay. So my final question for you then
Yeah,
is, other than writing an amazing book, what is something that an author can do, whether they're being self-published or traditionally published, that will make them more successful?
establish a presence. You unfortunately, you have to do this. You've got to be out there on social media, and it's getting harder and harder because there's so many different platforms now, right? Um, Facebook, TikTok, can't do Snapchat really, but all these platforms, you got to get out there, and you got to establish yourself, and you got to be a personality. Unfortunately, the days of being JD Salinger and writing one book, making $1 million off of it, and then go hiding out for the rest of your life. I mean, you could do that, but you got to be out there. You have to protect your private life. I always say get a separate author profile because there's a lot of creepy people out there, right? But you do have to kind of expose yourself a little bit. Build a mailing list. There's no one single answer as to what to do. You have to do everything, and it's a huge pain in the ass, and it's a time suck. But there's also an element of luck. I mean, you have to be in the right place at the right time sometimes. Or you got to make the right friends. If Tom Clancy, not that he's alive or anything, but if I ran into Tom Clancy and he's like, "Hey, I liked your book," and I say, "Oh, cool, thanks," and I walk away from him, well, I just blew my chance to have Tom Clancy turn around and say, "Hey, Mr. New York Times reporter that I'm good friends with, you might want to talk to Mr. Holmes over here. He's got a good book, right?" So you really got to network. You got to work your ass off. You got to keep writing because unfortunately, if you disappear off the internet for more than 3 months, or I'm kind of kidding, but it's a very, very fast paced world. You got to put product out. George R. Martin wouldn't have made it nowadays. It's you gotta be out there and just show your face, build a mailing list, and then learn how to run a business, because this is a business. It really is. I'm not the best in the world at it, but I've learned some pretty hard lessons. Um, you know, and don't think you're going to be a success overnight. I liken it to being a major league baseball player. Sure, sometimes you know the the bat boy gets grabbed to go pinch hit, ninth inning or something. But no, you got to start playing t-ball, and then all through grade school and then high school, and hopefully somebody grabs you for college, and then do well in college to get to be a to the point where you can live off of being an author nowadays, unless you get a big contract. uh, you got to work your ass off. My buddy Rick, Paltrow, Rick writes nonstop. He wrote like 1 million words last year or something like that, and he walks around with a laptop in his hand. I mean, you have a conversation with him, and he's writing while you're talking to him. I call him a cyborg sometimes, right? Rick can afford to live on his author stuff because he's writing 24/7, and it's hard work, but he does good stuff. So now he has a fan base, and you got a back catalog. You've got a number of books. People read one book, and they'll be like, okay, cool, I'm going to check out the rest of his stuff. So you got to put product out too. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are wise words. I feel like there's two segments of authors. There's the people that do it as a hobby for fun, for art, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like that's where I'm
right.
at right now. I got my day job too, just like you do. And then if you want to be successful and do it full time, you do have to put in the time to make it full time. It is your job. You can't just not write some days and expect to be successful. You can't call your boss and say, "I'm not going to come in today." Like you're your boss. You have to come in.
Yeah. So what are you writing, man?
So I have a. God, are you? Is this like the pitch room right now? Do I have to give you my elevator pitch if you want to pick me up?
Why not?
um,
I'm here,
I've got
right?
I've got one finished manuscript. I would say I need to do some more editing on it. It's been sitting around for a couple of years. I need to work on it a little more, but I'm not ready
Okay.
for that
No,
one
that's
yet.
good.
The one that my work in progress right now, I expect to be finished by the end of the year. I'm just around 70K words right now. It's a story about a drunk a prince who is a drunk, and his father dies, and he has the responsibility of kingship thrust upon him. And in the midst of this, they live in a completely secular kingdom. There's no magic. Nobody knows about magic. Magic doesn't exist as far as they're concerned. And somebody shows up and can do magic, and everyone is just like, "What the heck's going on?" So it's about him trying to run the kingdom while he's a drunk, and figuring out that isn't going to work, and then trying to figure out what to do with this mage who showed up on his doorstep. So that's my work.
Well, I know a company. I know a company that's starting to get into the fantasy field. All right. So if you're interested, no, we can talk offline. See, here's the thing. What I was just talking about. Always take the time to sell yourself or take that opportunity, right?
Mhm.
Because the indie world is very small, also, right? Especially in our genres, and a lot of times I will trade people back and forth, or manuscripts or whatever, with my friend Hillbilly, because I know he does more fantasy stuff, right? And he knows I do the military stuff. So I actually got really busy, and I gave him an entire series called Joint Task Force 13, which is a bunch of Marines that fight demons and all that other kind of stuff, right? And he's been pretty successful with it because I was just too busy to continue forward with it. And sometimes he'll send somebody to me, right? So even if what you're talking about with me isn't really my cup of tea, although it sounds really interesting, I might say, hey, yeah, send it to me, and I'll send it over to Hillbilly, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that's I'm trying to illustrate a point for the people that you're putting this out on your YouTube channel. Always be looking for that thing that might take you someplace, right?
Yeah.
So there you go.
Awesome. Cool. Well,
I'm a
while we're
recruiter in real life. Okay, so I can't help but do this stuff, right? So
yeah, push it on to
go ahead.
people.
Yeah,
Well, I was going to say, I got no more questions for you. Do you have any final comments before I let you go?
yeah. Read our stuff. No, if anybody out there works for Netflix and wants to get some great material to turn into a series, I have a standing 5% offer. For any contract we sign. Um, I'm going to be at MarsCon in Virginia Beach or Norfolk in January. So if you're around, stop by and see us, and definitely like and subscribe to Matt's videos, right?
Well, thank you.
And just if you want really good stories that are just we don't do politics. There's no anybody sends me a book that's got some kind of right or left wing agenda in it. I'm like, that's not going to work. We don't do politics. We tell stories. We entertain people. So if you want a little bit of escape from life and read it, feel free to leave me an honest review. Give me one of those 1 stars that tell me that I don't know how the military chain of command works. You know, even though I was in for 22 years, right? Just get out there. And so it costs you less for a book than it does for a cup of coffee. All right. So, and you'll get hours more out of it, unless you let your coffee sit there, stew. But that's what I got, man.
Awesome. Well, everybody, let's see if the clapping works now. We have J F Holmes. It's still not working. All right, I'm going to edit it in. You do get a round of applause, so thank you.
Cool.